Alright, so in section 4 we're going to talk about basic web forms. Now HTML5 has some great new tags and other features when it comes to forms, but we're not going to discuss that just yet. We're going to go over that in depth in chapter 4 and 5. So in this section I just want to go over what a form is and what the basic syntax of a valid HTML form is. Okay, so let's talk about what a form is and what it does. An HTML web form lets websites become interactive by allowing user input. So without forms, there's not too much we can do to actually talk to a website or to get feedback based on what we're looking for. Forms have front-end and back-end processing. Now, HTML takes care of the front end, and another language needs to take care of the back end. And that can be PHP, ASP. There's a number of server-side languages that'll process your form. HTML is used for a presentation only, an input only. It doesn't actually process the form. Now, forms include a series of HTML input tags and other elements. There's the text area tag, the select tag, the label tag, and we're going to go over those in this section. So we have the form tag, and like I said, it wraps around the entire form and all its elements. And the common attributes for a form tag would be the action. This would be an attribute of the form tag. It specifies the page or the script that would process the form, and this would be done on the server side. This wouldn't be HTML. What we would do would just be to define whatever file was to process the form. We would define that, so it could be, say, process.php, and that would be a file on your server that processes the form. Now, method is how the form gets processed, and I'm not going to really go over this here because it's out of scope. For instance, in PHP you have the get and the post method. The get would send the information through the URL, and the post method would send it through the form, and it would be you wouldn't be displayed in the URL. But that's something else. That's server-side scripting. But these are the two most common attributes for a form tag. So next we have the input tag, and the input tag is one of the most important elements of a form, and there's multiple different types. The first attribute we have here is type, and that could be text, password, it could be a checkbox, radio button, submit button. There's multiple different types of input tags. Now the next attribute we have here is one that would probably show up on all of the fields if the form was going to be processed somewhere else. If it was going to be processed with PHP, it would have a name, and that name is how you would identify that element in the script that it gets processed in. So, and it can also be used in client side. It can be used with JavaScript, validation. It can be used for numerous things. Next we have the size, which will specify the width of the input field, usually a text field. It would define the width in characters. So if you wanted it 50 characters long, the attribute would be size 50. The max would be the maximum amount of characters allowed, and you can set this to 1 to whatever, 500. So these are the most common attributes used on this particular tag. So the input tag is not the only field we can use for user input. Text area is another one, and a text area tag is used for a large block of text, and this would be maybe a comments field or a message field on a contact form, which I'll be showing you in the project for this section. And the text area tag takes a name attribute just like the input and pretty much the rest of the input type tags, and it has a rows and a calls attribute, and the rows would specify the length, the number of lines, which would be the length, the rows of the text area, and the calls would specify the visible width, so it would be the number of vertical columns. Now we have the max length attribute, which would specify the maximum number of characters allowed in the text area. This is just like the max attribute for the input tag that we just talked about. So those are the basic attributes for the text area tag. And here we have the select tag, and the select tag is used for drop-down type fields. It can be single. It's the single arrow that you click, and a drop-down will show, and you'll select one. Or it could be the kind where it's a list of multiple options, and you can hold Shift or Control and select multiple options. And it takes the name attribute just like all the other input fields. And if you want it to be the kind of drop-down where you can actually select more than one, then you would have the multiple attribute. And it also has the size attribute, which would specify the maximum of visible options. This would probably be used on the multiple type of drop-down. If they only wanted you to pick maybe 2 out of the 5 options or something like that. So that's the select tag. Alright, so next we have the label tag, and the label tag is a form element, but it's not a user input element. It's used to associate a field's heading with the input field. So you might have something like first name, just the text first name, and then maybe the input tag directly after it. And what this will do, if you wrap that text in a label, it will associate that text with the form, with the input field. So if you click on the text, it'll actually highlight the input field that text belongs to. And it takes the for attribute, which will just specify which form element the label is. And this would match up with the input element's name attribute. The last form related element we're going to talk about is the field set tag, and it's used to group together different input fields. Here we have an example. You'll see we have the name field set. This is just the field set open tag, and then you'd have the input fields, and then you'd close it. And this would be the sports field set, so you'd open the field set tag, add that whatever, it can be input boxes, check boxes, radio, and then you just close the field set. And that would, by default, your browser will most likely draw this border around it with the label of the field set here. And as far as attributes, we have the name, just like any other form field. The form, which would just specify the name of the form, and then we have a disabled attribute, and this would just disable all the fields within a certain field set. So now I think we're ready to dive into our project and implement all these form elements that we've talked about.